A hush settles over the world when one speaks of the old Mediterranean, an age when the sea breathed like a living creature, and the line between mortal and divine shimmered faintly like heat above sun-kissed water. In that ancient coastal realm, where cliffs plunged into turquoise depths and groves of laurel trembled with whispered secrets, nothing was entirely ordinary. The waves themselves carried memories, and the winds that curled around the rocks bore stories that seemed to pulse with longing. It is in such a place, suspended between the shimmer of dawn and the velvet of dusk, that the tale of Galatea and Acis begins, quietly, sensually, almost as if it had been waiting forever for the right moment to exhale. The world in which they lived was a tapestry of divine presence and mortal breath. Nymphs glided through water as naturally as humans walked upon the earth, and gods wandered the shores disguised as travelers seeking warmth for the night. Mortals knew better than to dismiss strange ripples in a still pool, or the sudden fragrance of salt and lilies on a windless afternoon. Everything was possible. Everything was alive. And yet, even in a place touched by the divine, love remained the most unpredictable force of all. Love could soothe the sea's temper, or it could stir storms that shattered cliffs and swallowed entire villages. Love could heal, and love could curse. Its power was feared, revered, and endlessly sought. Galatea, a sea nymph radiant as moonlit foam, belonged to this world of shimmering edges. Though her story would one day be sung with awe, at this beginning, she was simply part of the coast, woven into its tides and its quiet sighs. Her presence sensed more than seen. She moved with the elegance of water flowing around stone, her form fluid, yet unmistakably real. From the moment mortals caught a glimpse of her silver-white silhouette emerging from the blue, they knew she was no ordinary being. They felt it in their bones, the way they felt a coming storm or the tremor of distant thunder. She embodied all the softness and sensual mystery of the sea, gentle one moment, unfathomably deep the next. Yet, even a nymph could feel the weight of longing. Galatea was a creature of divine essence, but not exempt from the currents of desire that shaped the world. In her quietest hours, when the sea lay still like a polished mirror, she would linger near the shore, gazing toward the rugged cliffs where humans lived their brief, fragile lives. Something drew her there, though she could not name it. Perhaps it was the echo of laughter carried on the wind, or the glimpse of young lovers reclining beneath fig trees, whispering secrets they believed the gods would never hear. Or perhaps it was simply the age-old hunger to feel something beyond divinity, something human, tender, fleeting, a longing that pulsed with vulnerability rather than immortality.
Across those same cliffs lived Acis, a mortal shepherd whose life unfolded in rhythmic simplicity beneath the sun. Though he did not yet know it, his path would soon intersect with Galatea's in a way neither fate nor the gods could ignore. Acis belonged to the land, as Galatea belonged to the sea, earth to her water, warmth to her coolness, heartbeat to her tide. The contrast between them was the seed of something irresistible, something destined to pull them toward each other like moonlight pulling at the waves. But destiny rarely moves without friction, and the Mediterranean coast harbored forces that would soon surge against them. Among the shadows of sea-worn caves and the wild curves of the island's volcanic slopes dwelled another being, one whose desires burned hotter and more destructively than anyone else's. His heart was too large for peace, his passions too intense for tenderness. His name was Polyphemus, and though this introduction is not yet his moment, his presence hovered over the world like a dark wave gathering strength beyond the visible horizon. Even before his shadow fell upon the lovers, the air already trembled with the promise of conflict. But for now, however, the story lingers in the soft beginning, this delicate edge where everything feels possible, where desire has not yet tasted consequence. The sea glows with morning light, its surface rippling with hints of secrets waiting to surface. Birds circle lazily above cliffs scented with rosemary and wild honey. The breeze carries murmurs of something awakening, something that will soon ripple outward through realms both mortal and divine. In this starting moment, the Mediterranean is a sanctuary of sensual stillness. Each detail seems crafted with intentional beauty. The warm gold of sunlight spilling over white rocks, the gentle hush of waves stroking the shore, the scent of salt mingling with blooming oleander. It is a world designed to heighten emotion, to deepen breath, to invite the heart into spaces it might otherwise fear to enter. There is a softness to everything, a dream-like haze that wraps around the senses like silk, urging one to move slowly, to savor, to feel. And within that softness lies a promise, a whisper of the forbidden, the intoxicating, the transformative.
For the love that is forming, unseen, unnamed, but already stirring, is a love not meant to unfold easily. It crosses boundaries that gods once declared sacred, the line between immortal and mortal, between tide and soil, between eternity and the delicate fragility of a single human life. Such entanglements rarely escape the attention of divine forces, and the consequences of indulgence can ripple through the world like storms stirred by a god's wounded pride. Yet, knowing the danger does not stop the heart. It never has. The earliest threads of this tale weave themselves slowly, sensually. They begin with a glance that lingers too long across the boundary where water meets land. A shadow glimpsed beneath the surface, a voice carried by the wind that sounds almost like a calling. Galatea feels the pull before she understands it, before she even sees the shepherd whose quiet presence will soon become the center of her world. Acis feels it too, though he cannot yet name the strange restlessness that makes him wander toward the cliffs more often than before, as if the sea itself were beckoning him. Desire works quietly at first, its touch feather-light, almost imperceptible. It draws two souls into alignment long before they ever meet.
But below this gentle unfolding lies the myth's core tension, present from the beginning, even if the lovers cannot yet sense it. Love in this world has rivals. Love in this world has consequences. And somewhere far beyond the visible horizon, fate watches with patient certainty, knowing that the sweetness of what is forming will one day stand in contrast to the storm that follows. For now, the tale asks only that we breathe in this moment, this shimmering threshold where divine sea meets mortal land, where longing begins to bloom, and where destiny first stirs its wings. The Mediterranean world holds its breath in anticipation, as if aware that something beautiful and dangerous is about to be born. And in this stillness, this sensual hush, the story of Galatea and Acis finds its beginning, a myth where desire shapes destiny, where love dares to defy the boundaries of existence, and where the sea itself will one day weep for what it cannot keep.
Galatea was whispered into existence long before mortals gave her a name. The sea shaped her with the same patience it used to carve soft curves into the shore, and the moon lent her the quiet luminance that danced over waves on windless nights. Yet even these descriptions fall short, for Galatea was more than beauty. She was presence. She was the sensation that washed over those who glimpsed her, the sudden stillness in the heart, the feeling of being gently unmoored from the ordinary world. People who saw her did not remember details. They remembered an ache, a pull, a soft wonder that settled deep inside the rib cage and refused to leave. Her hair, often described in later songs, was not as important as the way it moved, flowing like water even when she stood motionless. Her eyes were remembered not for their color, but for their depth, as though they held the shifting palette of the entire sea inside them. Her voice, when she chose to speak, felt like a caress rather than a sound, something one felt on the skin and in the chest rather than simply heard. But these are surface things, external echoes of what truly defined her. What set Galatea apart, even among divine beings, was her emotional openness. Beneath her serene exterior lived a longing that pulsed with quiet intensity. She knew the vastness of the sea, the ancient rhythms of tide and moon, yet she yearned for something smaller, something human in scale. The divine world, for all its perfection, lacked the fragile sweetness she sensed in mortal hearts, the way humans loved as if every moment mattered because their time was so heartbreakingly brief. Galatea, though immortal, envied that urgency. She craved connection tainted with the possibility of loss, craved tenderness that could not be guaranteed, craved a love shaped not by eternity, but by choice. Even she did not fully understand this hunger, but it lived in her like a quiet tide that never ceased pulling her toward the shore. To the mortals who lived along the coast, Galatea was a mystery that awakened unnamed desires. Shepherds spoke of glimpsing a pale figure walking along the water's edge at dawn. Fishermen swore they felt watched by something benevolent yet distant as they cast their nets. Children claimed to hear laughter bubbling up from beneath the surface of tide pools. No one doubted her existence, though few dared to approach her. She belonged to the sea, and mortals knew better to reach for what they believed they could never hold. Yet Galatea, in her secret heart, wished someone would try.
Acis was that someone, though he did not know it yet. He was a young shepherd whose life unfolded along the warm slopes above the coastline where wild thyme perfumed the air and goats wandered lazily between patches of sunlight and shade. He did not possess divine beauty, he possessed something far rarer. His charm came from the vitality that radiated from him, the kind of vibrancy that made everything around him feel more alive. When he laughed, the cliffs seemed to echo with warmth. When he sang to himself while tending his flock, the birds fell silent as if listening. And when he moved, there was a lightness in his step, a confidence softened by innocence that made him seem like he belonged as naturally to the world as the wind or the sun. Acis's humanity was not a limitation, it was a flame. It burned with hope, curiosity, tenderness, and the unguarded passion of youth. He lived fully in every moment, never holding back, never fearing desire. For him, love was not a mythical force to be avoided, it was an experience to be embraced with open arms. This sincerity, this wholehearted capacity to feel, was what made him irresistible to a being like Galatea. She sensed him long before she saw him. When he walked the cliffs, she felt his presence in the water. When he rested under a pine tree and whispered songs of longing to the sky, she heard the vibrations ripple through the current. Acis was a bright spark, small but fiercely alive, and his mortality only made his light more spellbinding. When their eyes finally met for the first time, the world did not shift, it deepened. Galatea felt something inside her soften and tighten at once, like a wave curling around a stone it wished to keep. Acis felt his breath falter, not in fear but in reverence. He did not understand what he was seeing. He only understood that he never wanted to look away. It was not a revelation, but a recognition, as though they had known each other long before that moment. Their connection was not born then, it surfaced. Yet stories of love, even in their gentlest beginnings, never unfold in a vacuum. Beyond the cliffs, beyond the gentle warmth of this forming bond, lived a presence whose emotions were as immense as his body. Polyphemus, the Cyclops who wandered the wild volcanic slopes, was a creature shaped by extremes, immense strength, immense solitude, immense desire. The songs would later cast him merely as a monster, but in truth he was something far more complex. He felt deeply, too deeply perhaps for his own peace. His heart, oversized to match the rest of him, knew longing with a force that bordered on torment. He yearned to be loved, to be seen, to be cherished with the intensity he carried in his soul.
Polyphemus had watched Galatea from afar, long before Acis ever stepped onto the cliffs. To him, she was a beacon in a world that often felt unbearably empty. Her beauty stirred something fierce and tender inside him, something he struggled to shape into words. He admired her from a distance, not out of respect, but out of uncertainty, unsure how to approach a being so delicate, so beyond anything he had ever known. In his solitude, his affection grew into obsession, not malicious at first, but consuming. He believed that if Galatea could only see him, truly see him, she might understand the depth of his devotion. As Acis and Galatea drifted closer together, even in subtle early ways, Polyphemus sensed it. He did not see them, but he felt the shift in the world around him, felt the invisible threads of connection tightening in patterns that excluded him. His longing, once merely intense, began to throb with an undercurrent of desperation. He was not yet a villain. He was a being overwhelmed by desire, raw, unrestrained, and aching for reciprocity. Thus, the three figures stood on the threshold of their intertwined destinies. Galatea, luminous and longing for vulnerability. Acis, vibrant and brimming with youthful tenderness. Polyphemus, immense and driven by a yearning he could neither tame nor understand. Each carried a magnetism that would shape the unfolding story. Galatea's emotional depth, Acis's mortal warmth, Polyphemus's unbridled desire. Their paths had begun to bend toward each other, and the Mediterranean world, sensitive to the tides of emotion, prepared itself for the inevitable collision. For now, however, they remained suspended in this moment of introduction, their lives still separate, yet already in motion. The sea watches, the cliffs listen, and the myth gathers its breath, ready to deepen from longing into something far more powerful.
Desire does not erupt all at once. It unfurls, slow and deliberate, like a tide pushing farther onto the shore each day. For Galatea and Acis, the pull between them began quietly. At first, it was nothing more than a glance held a heartbeat too long, a smile exchanged across the boundary where sea met land. But desire has its own gravity, and soon even the smallest moments carried weight. Galatea found herself rising to the surface more often, drawn toward the warmth of the cliffs where Acis tended his flock. She told herself she only wanted to feel the sun on her skin, to listen to mortal songs carried by the wind, but the truth pulsed within her with increasing clarity. It was him, the shepherd with the bright laugh and earnest eyes. His presence tugged at something deep inside her, something she had never known she possessed. When he sat upon the rocks, humming softly to himself, she felt her chest tighten with a mixture of yearning and wonder. Here was a being who lived each day in fragile fullness, whose emotions burned quickly and brightly because they had to. Galatea watched him with growing fascination, feeling her divine calm unravel thread by thread. Acis, too, felt the shifting tide within himself. Whenever he caught sight of Galatea's form emerging from the water, her movements fluid, her gaze soft with curiosity, his breath seemed to catch in his throat. She carried a presence that awakened sensations he had never experienced before. A trembling anticipation, a warmth pooling low in his belly, a kind of awe that left him speechless. Yet his attraction was not rooted solely in her beauty. It sprang from the tenderness he sensed in her, the unspoken longing that mirrored his own. When she spoke, her voice brushed against his heart like fingertips trailing along the skin. She made him feel both incredibly alive and delicately exposed. Each meeting between them deepened the connection. What began as cautious interactions soon evolved into shared moments that lingered long after they parted. Galatea would glide to the shoreline, her steps soundless upon the wet stones, and Acis would approach with a mixture of reverence and eagerness, unable to hide his smile. They spoke of simple things at first, the color of the dawn sky, the music of distant waves, the scent of time under the midday sun. But beneath their words hummed an undercurrent of desire growing stronger each day. The more they spoke, the more their boundaries dissolved. Acis would reach toward her without thinking, brushing wet strands of her hair from her cheek, and Galatea would lean into his touch, savoring the warmth of his mortal heat. She would trace the lines of his hands, marveling at their coarseness, their humanity, the quiet strength they held. Every gesture carried meaning, every moment vibrated with possibility.
But desire does not grow in isolation. The cliffs, the sea, the wind, they all witnessed the unfolding intimacy and carried whispers of it far beyond the lover's awareness. And in the wild, volcanic caverns where Polyphemus roamed, those whispers found a heart ill-prepared to hear them. Polyphemus had long adored Galatea from a distance, his feelings immense and untamed. He had imagined her noticing him, perhaps one day returning his devotion. But as the days passed, he sensed a change in the air. The sea seemed to laugh with a softness he had never heard before. The goats on the cliffs seemed startled by some unseen presence, and when he walked near the shoreline, he felt the faintest vibration beneath his feet, as though the world itself trembled with secrets. It was not long before he saw them together. He emerged from a tangle of rocky shadows one late afternoon, drawn by a melody carried on the wind, Acis singing a gentle tune, while Galatea rested beside him, her head tilted toward him as if she were absorbing every note. They looked so natural together, so intertwined, that Polyphemus froze in place, unable to understand the sight before him. His single eye widened, not in anger, but in heartbreak, a raw ache that spread through his enormous chest. He watched Galatea laugh softly, the fingers brushing Acis' arm, and something inside him shattered. It was not rage yet, it was disbelief, then confusion, then a wave of pain so sharp it made him stagger back. The love he had nurtured in silence, the fantasies he had quietly fed with hope, now twisted into something darker. He felt desire melt into possessiveness, devotion into desperation. His longing, once merely intense, now grew wild and dangerous, fed by jealousy and the crushing weight of rejection he did not understand. But Polyphemus said nothing, not yet. He lurked in the shadows, watching the unfolding intimacy between the lovers, his emotions swelling into storms he could not control. Meanwhile, Galatea and Acis felt the growing tension without understanding its source. There were moments when Galatea would pause mid-sentence, sensing the sea's currents shift subtly, as though warning her of something approaching. Acis too noticed changes, shadows cast across the cliffs, even under clear skies, the distant rumble of earth beneath his feet. But whenever he looked at Galatea, the unease vanished. Her presence grounded him, soothed him, filled him with warmth no fear could extinguish.
Their attraction, however, did not remain gentle forever. Desire, once unleashed, demands boldness. Their hands sought each other more insistently. Their gazes lingered with greater hunger. When they met, the distance between them closed more quickly, their breaths mingling as they stood close enough to feel each other's hearts. The air around them grew charged, thick with the electricity of two beings drawn together by forces larger than themselves. Galatea found herself stepping beyond the shoreline more often, letting Acis guide her through the groves and meadows of the land. She reveled in the warmth of the earth beneath her feet, in the roughness of bark beneath her fingers, in the way Acis's laughter surrounded her like a protective embrace. Each new experience filled her with a kind of joy she had never known, a joy so profound it frightened her. Immortality had never felt empty until she tasted moments like these, moments that would end for him long before they ended for her. Acis too felt the stakes of their bond intensify. He lay awake at night, the scent of salt and lilies in his memory, wondering how he could possibly hold something so divine without losing himself. Yet each time he saw Galatea, all doubts dissolved. His longing overshadowed every hesitation. When he touched her, he felt transported beyond the confines of mortality, as though love itself suspended time. Desire became their compass. It guided their steps, shaped their choices, whispered to them in the quiet moments when they believed they were alone. But they were not alone. Polyphemus watched. And with each stolen embrace between the lovers, his longing twisted further, becoming a shadow that followed them endlessly. The conflict, once subtle, now pulsed beneath the surface of every encounter. The lovers felt the world tightening around them, though they could not yet comprehend the force behind it. Their passion grew brighter precisely because danger gathered at the edges of their reality. Galatea sensed the sea growing unrestless. Acis sensed the cliffs humming with tension. And Polyphemus, consumed by a desire he could no longer contain, felt jealousy coil inside him like a living beast. Thus, the stage of their fate was set. Divine longing intertwined with mortal tenderness, passion entwined with jealousy, vulnerability against overwhelming power. The pull between Galatea and Acis grew unstoppable, and so did the storm building just beyond their sight.
The night that became their turning point began without announcement, slipping softly over the coastline like a silk veil. The air was warm, thick with the scent of blooming myrtle and the distant hum of cicadas. The sea was unusually calm, its surface glimmering with threads of moonlight, so delicate they seemed woven by the hands of a goddess. Galatea rose from the water slowly,
her body emerging in a shimmer that blurred the line between divine and dream. Acis, who had been waiting on the shore with restless anticipation, felt his heart tighten in reverence and longing the moment he saw her. They had met many times before, but something in the air tonight pulsed with a different rhythm, deeper, heavier, as though the world itself understood the significance of what was about to unfold. Galatea approached him without hesitation, her footsteps soundless on the wet sand. Acis stepped toward her as if drawn by an invisible thread, his movements gentle yet charged with unmistakable desire. When they finally stood before each other, barely an arm's length apart, the breath between them seemed to warm and thicken. "Acis," she whispered, and the simple sound of his name held such vulnerability that it made him tremble. "Galatea," he murmured back, reaching out with a hand that hovered just above her cheek, seeking permission without words. She leaned into his palm, her eyes closing for a moment as she absorbed the warmth of him. That small motion shattered the last remnants of restraint between them. Acis drew her closer, and she stepped willingly into his embrace. Their bodies pressed together with a soft certainty, fitting into that delicate space where longing becomes something real and undeniable. Her hands slid up along his chest, tracing the lines of muscle shaped by years of tending flocks, and he felt as though her touch marked him in ways deeper than flesh. Their lips met in a kiss that began softly, a brush of tenderness, but deepened quickly into something fervent and consuming. It was not the hunger of reckless passion, but the surrender of two souls who had finally accepted the depth of their connection. Time loosened its grip on them. The world contracted to the warmth of their bodies, the taste of each other's breath, the quiet moan that escaped Galatea as their lips moved with growing urgency.
Acis felt every heartbeat with sharpened intensity, aware that he was holding a being far beyond mortal comprehension, yet she felt so achingly human in his arms. Galatea felt her divine essence tremble with emotion she had never known, raw, unprotected, exquisitely real. When she deepened the kiss, it was with devotion rather than dominance, a plea rather than a command. She pressed her forehead to his head, breathing him in as though he were the very air she had long been denied. "I fear this," she confessed softly, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Not you, but the way you make me feel." Acis cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I fear only losing you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Everything else I welcome, even if it destroys me." A shiver passed through her, not of cold, but of recognition. They were stepping into a space where the divine and mortal met in their most vulnerable forms. She kissed him again, slower this time, savoring him with an intensity that bordered on reverence. He responded with equal devotion, guiding her toward the soft grass beyond the shore where moonlight draped their bodies in silver. They lay together in an embrace that felt sacred. Galatea traced the curve of his jaw, the arch of his collarbone, the lines of his shoulders, marveling at the fragile strength of his mortal form. Acis let his fingers glide along her waist, her back, the smooth plains of her skin warmed by moonlit water. Every touch was a confession, every breath was a promise, their desire intertwined with emotion until the two became indistinguishable. When Galatea's lips trailed along his neck, Acis gasped softly, his hands gripping her hips with unconscious desperation. She felt his heart pounding beneath her palm, each beat a reminder of his mortality, precious, fleeting, unbearably fragile. In that moment, she realized she loved him not despite his humanity, but because of it. He loved with urgency because he had so little time. She loved with depth because she had too much. Their bodies moved together in a rhythm older than myth, guided not by lust alone, but by an exchange of trust, tenderness, and trembling devotion. The world around them faded into a blur of warm air and rustling leaves, the sea murmuring in approval as waves kissed the shore. For a moment, just a moment, Galatea felt what it meant to be mortal, to exist fully within a heartbeat rather than an eternity. And Acis felt what it meant to touch divinity, not with reverence or fear, but with love.
The climax of their union unfolded like a crescendo of emotion, their breaths mingling in ragged gasps as they held on to each other with desperate affection. Galatea pressed her lips to Acis's chest, feeling the rapid thrum of life beneath skin that glowed with moonlit warmth. Acis wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him as if trying to merge their souls. For a heartbeat, just one, they existed outside the reach of fate. Their love was a spark of pure light suspended in the dark. But fragile things break easily, and bliss cannot exist in a world where longing breeds jealousy strong enough to crack stone. As they lay entwined, their bodies still trembling from the aftershocks of intimacy, a distant sound rumbled through the cliffs, a deep guttural roar that vibrated through the earth. Galatea stiffened instantly, a shiver of dread slicing through her spine. Acis felt her tremble and sat up, his hand gripping hers tightly. Then they heard it again, louder, echoing through the night like the cry of a wounded beast. Polyphemus. The realization hit them with cold clarity. Galatea's breath faltered. The divinity within her stirred with fear. She knew that sound not as a threat, but as heartbreak turning into something feral. Acis. He knows, she whispered, her voice fragile. Acis rose to his feet, helping her stand, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and protective urgency. He had never seen the Cyclops, but he felt the weight of that roar in his bones. The air grew heavier, charged with the fury of a rejected heart. In the distance, a massive silhouette appeared atop the cliff, a towering figure whose single eye burned with anguish so raw it bordered on madness. Polyphemus stood motionless for a moment, staring down at the lovers with an expression carved from equal parts pain and rage. The heartbreak inside him eclipsed whatever gentleness had once existed. Galatea clutched Acis's arm, her voice trembling. "We must go." But the world had already begun to shift.
the fragile bliss they had shared shattered under the weight of a love too powerful to remain hidden, too forbidden to remain unchallenged. Their emotional union ignited a storm that would not be silenced. And as Polyphemus's roar tore through the night a final time, full of fury, grief, and broken devotion, the lovers understood that the price of their ecstasy had come due, and fate was already descending upon them like a gathering wave.
When the world fractured into a single shattering moment, it did so with a silence so complete that even the sea withheld its breath. Galatea felt the change before she understood it, a tremor in the marrow of the waves, a sudden weight in the air that tasted of iron and sorrow. The light that had moments ago drenched the shore in gold dimmed as though some unseen hand had drawn a veil across the sky. She knew, instinctively, painfully, that something precious had slipped from her grasp, something she had not yet learned to protect with the ferocity it deserved. The world, once soft and shimmering, tightened with dread. But she did not flee. She moved toward the darkness, toward the quivering edge of what now felt inevitable. Acis had always seemed woven from warmth, human warmth, mortal warmth, the kind that glowed fiercely because it was destined to burn briefly. She felt that warmth fading even before she saw him. She ran, feet barely touching the surface of the shallows, heart pounding like a wounded tide. And when she arrived, she saw the truth laid bare. The weight of Polyphemus's wrath had already done its work. A massive boulder, hurled with a force born from anguish, pinned Acis beneath it. Not crushed entirely, no, fate spared her that, but trapped, broken, trembling with the last flickers of his mortal strength. She fell to her knees beside him, and the world around them dissolved into nothing but breath, heartbeat, and the unbearable certainty that time was slipping through her fingers. Acis looked up at her, and even through the pain, he managed to find a smile. It was faint, fragile, a ghost of the one that had once made the shoreline feel endlessly new. His hand reached for hers, trembling but determined, as though he wanted to anchor himself to her presence a moment longer. Galatea took it, pressing it against her cheek, willing her divinity into him, even though she knew it would not be enough. Mortality was a law older than her, older than the sea, older even than love. She whispered his name, letting the syllables tremble against his skin, hoping that speaking it softly enough might persuade the universe to spare him. But the universe does not bend for tenderness alone. Acis's breaths grew thin, as delicate as the ripples of an evening tide. His eyes held no fear, only longing, longing to remain, longing to keep loving, longing to defy the boundaries of his humanity and stay beside her forever. She felt his pulse weaken beneath her touch, felt the warmth slip away like recession of waves from the shore. And when at last the final shiver left his body, the world fell impossibly still. Galatea did not cry, for her tears were currents too powerful for mortal grief.
Instead, the sea itself cried for her. The waves surged upward as though trying to reclaim him, cradling his lifeless form with the tenderness of a mother who refuses to let go.
Polyphemus watched from afar, his rage already withered, leaving only a hollow, agonizing remorse in its wake. But his sorrow did not matter. No apology could mend what had been broken. Galatea lifted her gaze toward the heavens, but the sky offered no mercy. She lifted her gaze to the sea, and the sea listened. Something ancient stirred in the depths, something older than the whims of gods and the passions of mortals. It answered her grief not with pity, but with transformation, a promise that love once kindled could not be extinguished by the simple ending of a life. The earth beneath Acis trembled, not with violence, but with awakening. The stone that had pinned him began to dissolve, losing its hardness, melting into something fluid and clear. His body followed, slowly, gently, as though the very molecules of his being remembered the call of water. Galatea felt the change as intimately as a heartbeat. She felt him slipping through her fingers, not into death, but into becoming. His blood ran like a trickle toward the sea, and from that trickle emerged a spring, bright, pure, shimmering with the remnants of his warmth, a spring that began to flow upward, outward, seeking shape, seeking voice, seeking permanence. Acis did not return in the form she knew, but he did not leave her. His essence, his tenderness, his laughter, his desire melded with the water, taking on a life that could not be destroyed or claimed by jealousy. Galatea watched as the spring grew, feeding a stream that sparkled like liquid sunlight. It wound through the rocks and poured into the sea, carrying with it a pulse that felt achingly familiar. She placed her hand into the flowing water, and the stream responded, curling around her fingers like a lover's touch. It was him, not wholly, not physically, but undeniably him. This transformation was not a gift from the gods, nor an act of vengeance. It was love refusing to end. It was the world finding a way to honor what had been stolen. Acis was no longer mortal. He was eternal, a spirit of the waters, a flowing pulse forever connected to her realm. Galatea felt her grief deepen with this realization, not because he was gone, but because he had become something she could no longer hold, kiss, or cradle. Their intimacy had changed form, no longer flesh to flesh, but essence to essence. Yet even in this shift, she felt a strange comfort. He would always move with her tides, murmur in her currents, and whisper against her shores.
Polyphemus, upon witnessing this miracle, collapsed beneath the weight of his sorrow. He did not approach her. He did not dare. The wind carried his mourning, a low animal sound that echoed along the cliffs. But Galatea did not turn toward him. Her world was water, and Acis now lived within that world. She sank into the stream's flow, letting it coil around her arms like silk. She whispered to it, whispered to him, letting her voice travel through the currents with a tenderness that mortal ears could never perceive. The water shimmered in response, as though acknowledging her presence, promising her that love had not died, only shifted into a form that could not be broken again. In the days that followed, the stream became a sanctuary. Nymphs gathered to sing of the young mortal who became a river spirit, of the goddess who mourned him, of the love that defied even the cruelty of fate. Travelers passing through the region felt something stirring within them when they touched the water, a quiet longing, a tender ache, a whisper of a romance too powerful to be contained in a single lifetime. The stream became a symbol of devotion, of transformation, of desire that endured even when the world sought to tear it apart. Galatea remained near the water often, letting its pulse soothe the ache that still lingered in her chest. She would lie against the rocks, feeling the stream spill over her skin like a memory made tangible. And sometimes, only sometimes, she felt him, felt Acis move beneath the surface, felt his presence swirl around her, felt his essence hum against her own like a wordless confession of love. These moments were fleeting, delicate as morning mist, but they were enough to anchor her, enough to remind her that love, once born, does not end with loss. She would never forget the warmth of his mortal body, the trembling sweetness of his breath, the way he had looked at her as though she were the horizon itself. But she also learned to cherish this new form of connection, a love that flowed through the world, unbound, unbroken. Their story did not end with death. It continued, fluid and luminous, in every ripple that touched the shore, in every glimmer of sunlight on the water, in every whisper of tide that carried his name.
In the hush that follows every great tale of love and loss, there lingers a breath, a tremor, a soft echo that refuses to fade. The story of Galatea and Acis settles into that space now, not ending so much as dissolving gently into the quiet places of the world, where myths continue breathing long after the lovers within them have transformed. This reflection rises from that hush like a final exhale beneath the darkening sky, inviting the heart to linger a moment longer in the space where desire and sorrow intertwine. For every myth is, at its core, a vessel for longing, and this one pulses with a longing so tender that it feels almost forbidden to touch. It is the longing of a goddess for the warmth of human skin, the longing of a mortal to transcend his brief existence, the longing of a world that aches to hold the fragile things it knows it must someday release. Their love did not belong to a single realm. It lived suspended between sea foam and heartbeat, tide and breath, eternity and the flicker of mortality. And because of that, it resonates with a quiet ache, reminding us that the sweetest desires are often the ones shadowed by impossibility. Desire itself is a strange and luminous force. It pushes boundaries, redraws the lines between realms,
and dares the heart to reach beyond what is safe or certain. Galatea loved Acis with a tenderness that made the sea itself soften. Acis loved her with a devotion that made mortality seem too fragile a vessel for such depth. In loving one another, they stepped deliberately into a space where joy and peril lay intertwined. Myths remind us that love like theirs is never simple. It is not gentle in the way a calm shore is gentle. It is gentle the way moonlight is gentle, beautiful, consuming, and impossible to grasp without consequence. And yet humans return to these stories again and again, not because they promise safety, but because they speak to the yearning that lives quietly within all hearts, the yearning to be seen, to be desired, to be cherished beyond reason. Their story also whispers of the cost of such yearning. Loving across worlds is an act of defiance, and defiance always invites the attention of forces larger than oneself. Polyphemus's desire, wild and unrestrained, reminds us that love can become distorted when fueled by possession rather than tenderness. His longing was not evil in its origin, it was simply raw, ungoverned, hungry, but in its hunger it destroyed what it sought to claim. Here lies one of the oldest truths myths dare to teach, that love is not made purer by power, nor strengthened by force. It thrives only in the gentle spaces where vulnerability is allowed to bloom. Acis and Galatea lived in that fragile space, and because it was so fragile, it could not withstand the crush of jealousy. And yet, even in the face of ruin, their love refused to disappear. This is what grants the myth its lingering resonance. Acis did not fade into darkness. He flowed into a new form, becoming something enduring, something that touches the world long after his heartbeat has ceased. His transformation is not merely a consolation, it is a testament to the idea that emotional truth cannot be erased by violence or fate. Love leaves traces, ripples, currents, echoes that thread themselves into the world in ways that outlast the hands that shaped them. Galatea's grief did not drown her. Instead, it wove itself into the natural world, turning sorrow into a stream that still whispers his name. In this way, their story becomes one not of finality, but of continuation. Myths endure because they allow us to hold contradictions without breaking under them. They let love be both tender and tragic, desire be both healing and dangerous, endings be both mournful and luminous. The story of Galatea and Acis holds all these contradictions with a delicate, aching balance. It reminds us that to love someone fully is to accept the risk of losing them, and yet to love them anyway. It teaches that even when loss comes, swiftly, brutally, without mercy, the essence of what was shared can linger, transforming itself into something eternal. Such stories echo across centuries because they reflect truths that pulse beneath the surface of every human life. As we stand at the end of this tale, we are invited to look inward.
What is the shape of our own longing? What are the boundaries we have dared to cross for the sake of connection? And what have we lost or gained in the process? Galatea's devotion, Acis's tenderness, Polyphemus's unraveling heart, they all mirror pieces of our own internal landscapes. We recognize their emotions because we have felt them in quieter, more human ways. The ache of wanting, the fear of fragility, the desperation of holding on to something slipping away. Their divine and mortal forms may be distant from us, but their emotions are startlingly close.
Perhaps that closeness is what makes the story's final notes feel so gentle, so lingering. The myth does not end with sharp edges. It dissolves into reflection, inviting the listener to breathe with it, to let its currents move through them like the stream that carries Acis's transformed spirit. It asks us to consider the nature of love that seeks no possession, love that recognizes the soul of the beloved as something to be honored rather than claimed. The tenderness between Galatea and Acis was not born from conquest, but from recognition, from the quiet, electric understanding that passes between two beings who see each other clearly. Their connection was brief in mortal terms, yet expansive in the way only mythological love can be. And so the final truth is this. Myth preserves not the literal events of their lives, but the emotional imprint they left upon the world. It keeps their longing alive, suspended in a place where time cannot diminish it. We return to their tale not to witness tragedy anew, but to feel the resonance of a love that dared to stretch itself across the boundaries of sea and flesh and fate. Their story becomes a reminder that longing is not a weakness, but a sign of depth. That vulnerability is not a flaw, but a doorway. That loving intensely, even when the world trembles with danger, is one of the most profoundly human acts imaginable. As this reflection drifts toward silence, the myth continues to whisper. It whispers of tides that carry memory, of streams that remember tenderness, of goddesses who mourn yet continue loving in ways the world cannot fully comprehend. It whispers of Acis's spirit flowing endlessly, brushing softly against the shores where Galatea still listens. And if one stands quietly enough beside such waters, letting the breeze touch their skin and the sound of the current hum beneath their heartbeat, they may feel it too, the faint, shimmering echo of a love that refused to vanish, a love that transformed rather than surrender, a love that still lingers, soft as a sigh and deep as the sea itself.